I'm super excited today. I've got a guest from Pacific Palisades who nearly lost his home. He's active over there. He knows lots of people who have lost their homes. And he's seen a lot of the videos that I've been posting about China specifically and how they're buying up a lot of land in the LA fire zones. And so we've got Reza here with us. And Reza, give me a little bit of your background. I think you were telling me that you've worked extensively with law enforcement, both federal and local agencies, and you've been involved in some of these investigations having to do with the Chinese. Is that right?
So they're not specific to Chinese. It's interesting that a international anything that's international has to be started by Congress, by Senate, at the highest levels. So federal and local are not allowed to do international investigations without it. And it's been pretty much dead silent regardless of how much data, how much information comes across everything. And I'm so happy that you're posting these things about, who's buying up what in Palisades, because you're absolutely right. All I'm hearing from my neighbors is that 6 months ago, nobody wanted to sell, and now they're all selling. And I wasn't sure what's going on.
Yeah, I was looking at Zillow, and I mean, there's over 100 listings in Pacific Palisades, similar number over in Altadena, and I've got the data. I just got a full printout of every transaction in both or all three Pacific Palisades, Malibu, and Altadena, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of is whether it be Chinese or otherwise, it's a lot of foreign investors who are coming and buying the lots. And then I've looked into this, and what I'm seeing, this has been a trend for years, is they're all cash purchases. So they're pricing a lot of Americans out of the market who don't want to buy at these high interest rates, and they're foreign investors coming in. And like I said, specifically Chinese kind of have the lion's share of that, buying tons of properties. And from what I was hearing from you earlier with some of our conversations is you've been involved in some investigations, and can you tell us a little bit about your background and exactly what you do and how you're connected?
So I work for well over a decade. I've worked with multiple jurisdictions, police departments, mostly forensic side of things. So these are crime labs, crime scene units, and it goes across anything that's criminal. So it's drugs, it's criminal activity of any sort, and it bleeds into information that goes to DEA, FBI, whoever else is gets involved with it. And so these
Right.
are multi-jurisdictional investigations or local investigations that just kind of feed into the bigger picture. I was going to say, so it's interesting that people think DEA is the lion's share of drugs investigation, but they end up getting a lot of the information and data from local police departments and state police departments.
Okay, because you were saying they can't really get involved in these international investigations independently. Is that why?
That's part of it, and you have to, it's a disjointed picture because drugs are produced here, drugs are produced in Mexico, drugs are produced everywhere. They're consumed here, so this is where you see the end result. And so for a DA agent or a police officer, drug seizure or whatever it is, they have no idea what they're looking at. They got a bag of something, right? And it's not like the movies where they stick their finger and go, cocaine. Sure way to go to the emergency room. So it goes to the crime lab and they'll look at it and go, okay, that's actually, 10% fentanyl and 50% meth and whatever else there is.
And I was in some of my videos, I think this is one of the things you contacted me about, is I was talking about how there's a big operation going on and that a lot of these real estate transactions and why they're in cash purchases is because there's a laundering mechanism going on. So that, whether it's through prostitution rings or, drug dealing or whatever it is, they've got all this cash that they have to dispose of, and real estate is often a vehicle for that. And I think you were telling me a little bit about LA being a major hub, LAX specifically of imports and things like that.
Exactly. So LA is definitely a major hub. You can talk to any sheriff's department anywhere in the country, and they'll tell you LAX specifically is a major hub. People are coming in with like suitcases full of drugs. and just walking out. And it's been a problem. The port of LA has been a huge problem. Everybody knows that.
Specifically, as it has to do with like fentanyl, what are you seeing, and what is your lab test? What type of trends are you seeing in illegal drug use? What's coming into LAX?
So it's not just LAX, it's coming from everywhere because they're not busting people. It's hard to quantify how much is coming through LAX, how much is coming through port, how much is coming from southern borders. And there's things that are being produced here. We know pharma companies in the past and pharmacists have played a role in this. So there's so much of it, it's hard to tell what's coming from where. But we are seeing the end result of this epidemic of drug addicts and zombie-like people and homeless and just complete destruction of people and families. Uh, the the things that are very clear that we all know, right? We know that at some point Chinese started giving Mexican drug cartels the ingredients for meth and fentanyl, gave them the know-how and equipment to put it together. And that's when we saw that huge surge. And I sent you some vetted data from Justice Department and Congress showing a huge surge all of a sudden around 2013, 14, something like that, of meth and fentanyl coming through our borders. And so that made a huge difference. It pretty much franchised it.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you about. You used that analogy when we spoke on the phone of the franchise. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works?
So this is all well-known stuff. It's pretty old news, right? They would supply them with all the basic ingredients and instructions of how to put it together, equipment on how to put it together. So just like McDonald's, here's all the stuff you need. Your job is drug cartel's job is to put it together and bring it over and hand it to the users.
Yeah, and then my understanding is then that money often is also then laundered by the Chinese through crypto exchanges or what have you. It's interesting the way the immigration trends have been over the last many years because there's now so many different Chinese people, or millions, that really can be people who they can disperse this money to in amounts that are, not traceable, won't red flag the banking systems. And we talked a little bit about that. Have you seen anything, or what do you hear from the law enforcement agencies of how they think this all works?
So again, it's really hard to quantify because there's not a singular investigation saying, "Hey, this is the same trend we're seeing this everywhere." All right. So I sent you some of the immigration number, and in 2010, the Obama administration made a deal with Chinese government to give millions, as many as they want, 10-year visas. And to keep that in perspective, a 10-year visa is almost like a green card. I've gone through immigration. So a green card is not a permanent residency, it's 10 years, and you can come and go as you please and live in this country. It's pretty much the same thing. And what we saw everywhere in very specific towns and neighborhoods got targeted. Sierra Madre in Los Angeles. I used to live in Potomac, Maryland. That city became, a lot of Chinese. Rockville, Maryland, right next to it became mostly Chinese. So they would come in by the millions, and those numbers I send you are numbers
Yeah.
of, yeah, they're right off the immigration and DHS site. So anybody can just Google them and go look them up. Tens of millions over, 10-year period, however, are coming in, and more are coming in every day, but they're also staying. And what we saw, and again, this is my own neighborhood in Maryland, they would come in and buy $1 million homes cash. They would buy investment properties on top of that cash, or businesses cash, and they would bring multi-generational family members. And they're buying cars, paying for tuition, everything cash. So this is millions per family coming in. And so out of tens of millions, and this is happening in Canada, for Europe, South America, Central America, everywhere in the world, this is same trend that's happening. And the important thing to remember is a Chinese bank can't hand somebody dollars unless they have it as reserves or they exchange it. And there's, again, official numbers for reserves of dollars and euros. in Chinese banks. And at some point they said it was 50 billion, and said 100 billion, nowhere near these numbers. So to kind of quantify this, out of these tens of millions, let's say 1 million family came and settled in the US. And let's go with a conservative number if they brought in just $1 million each. That's $1 trillion in dollars, not in yuan, that was brought over to the US. And any exchange mechanism would break. So countries like Venezuela, countries like Iran, where tons of money got exchanged, their exchange rate went from like 100 pesos to a million, and their money became worthless. But this money did not exist, and one can speculate as to how, trillions of dollars in dollars, and then also euros and others, came out of this country. So this is not money you can really trace back. And these Chinese families are not criminals, they're not bad people. They're just given an opportunity for a better life, so they took it. So this is where that millions of operatives comes in. These people came and settled here, and they're thinking they're going to have a better life. And all of a sudden, a few years later, somebody goes to them and says, "Here, send this money somewhere." And now what are you going to do? And the crux of it, I should probably go back, as we kind of got to know our Chinese neighbors, the same story over and over again, which was we found that this money was not given to them, it was not their money, it was a loan. Most of these people were middle class, lower class families. And so same story came up again and again. They were told they can go to some local bank and tell them a story about investment and they get $100,000 a year. And then the second step was go to Hong Kong and show them they got $100,000 in yuan, and they get a lot more, $1 million in dollars. And then they had very clear instructions: go to the U.S. Embassy, get this 10-year visa, bring the family over, and people already in these neighborhoods here who helped them settle. And again, these people are, average, ordinary people looking for a better life. And so they took it and they came here. But this money was a loan. And so now the second part comes in, which is now a few years later, somebody goes to them and says, "Here's some money, transfer it." And there's two favorite ways that kept coming up again and again as we talked to law enforcement and everybody else. One was a system of trust. So you're a drug dealer, you sold $100 million worth of drugs, and your choices for laundering is take all these $5 and $10 bills, fill up a bunch of trucks and try to drive them somewhere, right? Or drive it to a bank and go, "Hey, I got a truck full of $5 and $10 bills. Would you mind laundering this for me?" And so it's one person with a lot of money, you get caught and you're screwed. And instead, you take $10 million and you go to 1,000 people and you say, "Send $10,000. And the system of trust worked like this. A person here is handed $10,000 and the handler says, "I want to send to Italy." He calls his sibling, friend, whoever it is in Italy, and goes, "Give that handler $9,000. And that's it, done. No wire transfer, no money transfer, nothing. Everything is untraceable. And then the second part is through real estate. Keep in mind, these were loans, right? So somebody comes and hands you $100,000 cash, and you go either to the Chinese branch of the bank, and you give them $100,000, and they give you a receipt for repaying your loan, $100,000 off your loan. And now it's clear and clean. You're good to go. Or if you're really crafty, you have some of that money in Citibank or Bank of America, and you go there and you actually draw a check for $100,000 and in the name of paying off that loan, and then take that $100,000 and put it under a mattress, whatever you want to do.
And rewind for just 1 second. So where does the loan originate from?
So they do a multi-step thing from what I understood. From what I heard from every one of these people, it's a multi-step thing. So the first one is mainland China, and it's usually in yuan. And then the second part is usually what I heard over and over was Hong Kong, where suddenly the money becomes dollars. And I'm not sure if it becomes dollars from China to Hong Kong or Hong Kong on. And these are things where, a congressional investigation 10 years ago or even today would have been helpful.
Right, which I know the U.S. Attorney's Office is currently looking into all these things. There's some open investigations right now. I spoke to the U.S. Attorney's Office here in California yesterday, and he was telling me, I can't say too much about it because it's in an open investigation. But like you and I are talking about, this is a well-known issue, and the scale of money that we're talking about is almost unfathomable. How much money is entering the country. And I hear a lot of talk in the media, which I don't particularly understand, about the money manipulation, but I think that's partially what you're touching on. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really easy. It's again, the system of trust is, this is my sibling. So if somebody hands me $10,000 in cash, I have a bunch of businesses, right? And the other person hands that person $9,000. And if my brother's kid, my nephew is here, he can stay at my place for free for 3 months. Maybe I pay for his college, pay for his car, something, right? And so that one disappears. And then the repayment of the loan has been the one that's more related to real estate. So kind of back to your point about buying stuff in Palisades, it'll originate from China with money that can't be traced. And it's loan money and it's not real money. And then the person over time pays it back by laundering money, whether it's drugs or prostitution, whatever it is. Again, these people, most of them, none of these people who lived in my neighborhood were criminals, but they don't have a choice. They're not, nobody's asking them to do this. They're being told, here it is, do it around.
So, okay, you just kind of completed the circle with me. So you're saying, to summarize, this money originates from China in the form of a loan. These people will then use that loan to buy real estate here in the U.S. or like in the fire zones that we're talking about. And then to pay off those loans, they're often using laundered money through one of these illicit activities. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's generally how it works, exactly. None of this stuff is secret. This is all like well known. It's been happening over years and years.
Oh, sure. Yeah, as I've looked into it here, I'm seeing there's a lot of documentation on these different investigations. But you and I talked about the difficulty from a forensic perspective of actually figuring out where the money's coming and going, just because the scale of it's really difficult. And we know more about some of the drug importation and distribution that we know a little bit more about. Another thing that you were telling me about on the phone that I found really interesting was what you have seen in the lab, as far as you were telling me they use different things to cut the drugs, and you're seeing the percentage that drugs are being cut really go through the roof. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, some of the scariest things that, you would have never thought would be popular are becoming very popular. So there's a synthetic and oxycodone is not exactly natural, but there's some kind of a synthetic version of that that's coming out that has a huge death rate, right? And that's one of the newer things that's coming up. And I'm trying to remember the name of that drug, but I'm sure it has like 6 different names. And then something we saw a few years ago, which was completely strange and didn't make sense, was xylazine, which is also called tranq, and then on the street they call it junk. And this is stuff, chemicals they use to cut drugs. When they get that cocaine, it's like a brick, right? So you gotta turn it into powder and cut it, and that's what they use to do it. And it's horrible. It rots you from inside. Somebody figured out if you take enough of this garbage, you can get high off of it. And of course, the homeless were the first victims because for them, this is even cheaper than heroin. It's even cheaper than fentanyl. They started smoking, snorting, and shooting the stuff. And what it does, it rots you from inside. So literally, these homeless people were starting to look like zombies, and they were dying from flesh wounds, from wounds that this thing was rotting them from inside. So there's all this garbage that's just constantly popping up. The drug addicts are so desperate they'll do anything to get high. It's horrendous.
Right, and I think we've all seen that living here in LA, where you do drive around and you pass a bus stop, and there's somebody sitting there whose flesh is literally rotting away. And I've asked the question myself, like, how does that even happen? That they've reached this state of poor health, and it sounds like that has a lot to do with it. Is that chemical that you mentioned just now, is that from China? Is that where that originates from?
That stuff is so cheap, it can come from anywhere. I probably wouldn't know off the top of my head, and I can ask around. It could be coming from China, but China has been a huge source of all sorts of chemicals, drugs that we had never seen before. And small quantities of it are usually pretty potent. So I would not be surprised. And again, it's so hard to trace this stuff without like an international team and with a lot of backing from federal government at the highest levels.
When you guys are testing these chemicals in the lab, are you seeing them as a completed drug where there's multiple chemicals already synthesized together, or are you dealing with the raw materials? Are they seizing that type of stuff where these drugs haven't been manufactured yet? Now you just have a bunch of different components.
Everything. So if you can think it, we see it. The most common thing you see with the manufactured end drugs are pills, and they have a marking that says that would mean oxycodone or something like that. And then when you test them, you break them up, you find out that it's oxycodone, it's got fentanyl in it, and it's got meth. And I'm sorry to say it, we all know somebody who OD'd on this stuff. One of my son's friends, he thought he was taking oxycodone and OD'd on it. And when the lab tested it, realized it had fentanyl, more than enough to kill him. And so this has been also another pattern of people are taking one thing, but they have no idea what's in it.
Which is so interesting because we've taken vacations to Mexico or South America before, and you always see the tourist warnings and things. Don't experiment with these drugs. Don't buy something from one of these kind of sketchy pharmacies because you never know what's in there. But it's the exact same thing here with these pills that you said are manufactured, labeled. You could think you're taking one thing, and the reality is you have no idea what you're taking at all.
And they do a fantastic job. Some of them we see come in exact packaging that you see coming out of a pharmacy for oxycodone or Xanax. It's another one that's very popular. And Xanax has meth, it has fentanyl, it has God knows what else. I'm trying to remember this chemical we saw that's a synthetic opioid, and it's like 100 times more potent than fentanyl. And we started seeing these. I think the first place that I personally heard about it was San Bernardino or Riverside, or some of those areas. And again, just spread out. And this stuff is so potent. Police officers literally touch the bag, not even it, but touch the bag around it, and they end up in the hospital. So you can imagine what it does to a person who actually consumes it.
Oh, sure. I've seen those body cam videos before where, they accidental exposure and you have someone ODing. Well, I want to make the point because I make these videos and I don't want people to think that I have any special dislike for Chinese people or that it's some kind of a racial or ethnic prejudice. It's more about the influence that I'm concerned about. I think if we have an adversary right now on the world scale, a legitimate adversary, it's China. They steal a lot of our technology. It's no secret that they've had spies here. Every person who comes from China on a visa, or even as a long-term immigrant who might attain citizenship, they have some tie to the CCP, and by law, if they're asked to gather intel or to do the bidding of the CCP, they're required to do that. And let's say even if they have citizenship here, if they've been able to get that, if they have family that's still over in China, there's still a way to put leverage on them in order for them to do the bidding of the CCP. So that's really my concern when I'm talking about these things. You see everybody talking about how we don't want there to be a land grab in Pacific Palisades from the California government, and we don't want there to be a land grab from big companies like BlackRock and investors rezoning and changing the communities. And I think there needs to be an equal consideration when we're talking about foreigners coming in who can influence our politics in a pretty short time, especially with some of these investments that we're talking about, like buying a house. If you can demonstrate, I think it's if you create 10 jobs or but with about an $800,000 investment, you can have a 5 year path to citizenship basically as a Chinese person. And that's concerning to me. That can change a political landscape pretty quickly, especially at the rate that they're buying up this property. We know places like Temple City, Arcadia, Cerritos. I just talked to the former mayor of Cerritos on the phone like 2 days ago, and he was telling me exactly this dynamic happens. People will move here, quickly get citizenship, through one of these avenues that we're discussing, and then it doesn't take very long, and you see a huge influence, political influence, that's not just about American politics, but we're getting politicians in who are very pro-China. They're not as much California first or America first. So that's really what I'm worried about on the broader scale.
And I would second what you said, and outside of political spectrum, again, none of my neighbors who were Chinese were criminals. These people were just offered a better life, and they took it, never thinking that 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, somebody's going to tell you, you better do this. And remember, these people came on loans. So it's easy enough for the Chinese government, for the bank to just pull their loans if you don't cooperate. And, that's it. You lost everything you have, foreclose on you, right? So they're not bad people. They're just kind of caught in the middle with a promise that's not true. It's a really sad. It's like victims all around, and it's terrible.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder why some of these properties, like there was one right across the street from the Staples Center that was bought by Chinese. It was a big investment, and within a couple of years, construction stopped, and it's just sitting there vacant. And I've heard this story. I get DMs all the time since I've started talking about this, where people say, "Well, hey, someone bought my house and now it's just vacant. There's nobody living there, nobody been living there for the last year or so." And I wonder if that has something to do with it. I wonder if there are people being foreclosed on, or they're in some kind of a difficult situation with this loan that they received, and now somebody has taken control of the property.
Exactly. Who knows who's going to take control? This poor person came in, thought they were going to buy a house and live there, and all of a sudden they disappeared into thin air. Who knows who's going to get that? And from my side of it, from the Palisades, 6 months ago, most of my neighbors, if not all of them, said, we're going to rebuild. And now I'm seeing them one by one because the government has made it so difficult to rebuild. And there's so many burdens in front of them. They're looking at a 10-year process. And most of them are saying, and they're not selling at a premium, they're selling at a loss and walking away because they don't want to spend 10 years rebuilding something that may not even happen.
Yeah, I remember people asked me about this early on, within the first 3 months or so that after the fires, how long I thought this would take for the communities to bounce back fully like they were before the fires. And I said, 15 to 20 years is realistic. And there were some people who were really angry about that, but we're starting to see, we're 8 months. There's only been, I think, 100 permits issued, or some people are saying less than 100 permits issued. And then people are running out of temporary housing budgets. They're finding out that getting money from insurance is not so easy, and they're starting to sell. And I wanted to ask you, you said your home was heavily damaged by smoke.
No, well, heavily damaged by smoke, but luckily nothing like fell down, so I already have, so, and again, this is not a good thing, but I have one neighbor who um, out of desperation has moved back in because like you said, he didn't have insurance, he didn't have, enough money to stay at a housing outside for too long. So working person like me. So it is somewhat livable, but do you really want to live in the middle of this kind of a desert of nothing is there? Everything's kind of sketchy. If you want to buy groceries, you got to drive like 45 minutes, 30 minutes to buy groceries. The water sometimes smells. We're not sure what's happening. So all of us honestly thought those whose houses survived, we thought we would be back full time by March or April.
And what are you hearing from the community? Now, you told me that everybody wanted to rebuild. Now you see more lots selling. But I guess tell me some of the stories that you're hearing from friends and family. How does it feel like the progress is going from the perspective of a homeowner or a Palisades resident?
It's incredibly frustrating. So, we were told back in January that by February you'll have power, and every month it's moved, right? And power was connected literally to maybe 3 weeks ago in my neighborhood. This is Sunset Mesa, right next to the Getty Villa. So out of 500 and some homes that were their houses and condos, less than 50 survived. So you're in the middle of just burn zones. They have cleared out most of the lots, but again, it's just empty lots sitting there. The only person that I know that got a permit to build was pulled pretty much as soon as they got it. I don't know the story of it. I've heard rumors that they try to make the house bigger or something, but they got a permit and then the permit got pulled. So I think it's this feeling of helplessness and melancholy. And a lot of my neighbors who never, ever thought about this just recently have joined lawsuits because they're just frustrated. And like you said, insurance companies are not paying up as much as they should. And so they're in the hole. And so this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness is kind of starting to set in more and more. And so I'm hearing more and more people who said, we will never sell or selling. And keep in mind, places like Palisades and Malibu, people don't sell. They hand their house down generation to
Oh
generation.
yeah.
So for an external buyer to come in and buy something, you have to have incredible luck, a lot of connections. The only way I could buy something there, and mine is not a house, it's a little itty bitty condo. Um, I had to hire someone that I had to hire an agent from Malibu who had connections and knew what's what and bought it off market. And that's the only way I could buy something there. So this is a golden opportunity for these investors who are buying it probably at a loss from these people. And it's just a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness is driving it.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the power situation because I'm experiencing that on some of my job sites where, our normal progression on these projects would be we call for a temporary power pole, they hook up a meter for us, and we tap right into the grid and we have power to run our construction sites. But at many of these, they have no power yet and they want to send out generators. Are you on a generator now?
Not anymore. So we were on a generator for months and that comes and goes. So it's not like you can live on the generator. But I think it was about 3 weeks ago or so, or 2 weeks ago, they connected the power. It's not 100% there. It's like half of the street lights are there, half aren't. The building itself has, I would say, 75, 80% of the time has had power. So that's one issue. The second issue was water. For a while, it smelled bad. It came and went. There's all sorts of stuff. I know some of the places, the sewer line or whatever goes out has been damaged enough that may or may not work.
That's going to be a huge problem. After the Army Corps of Engineers left, I'm I'm predicting now. We haven't really seen the chickens come home to roost on this just yet because not enough people are building. But one of the things that the Army Corps of Engineers was not required to do that private contractors were was to locate the sewer lines and cap them properly. So you've got thousands of properties where they basically just bulldoze right through the main sewer connection. And I can guarantee there's all kinds of mud and other debris that's trapped in there. So I'm anticipating that is going to be a big problem once things really get underway and people actually start trying to use the sewer system and live in it. So I'm concerned about that. I'm curious about the electric rates on the generator also. Were those comparable to what you normally would be paying?
That's a good question. I've honestly, again, just like everybody else, I've been so not paying attention to these things. I know we're getting bills, but I haven't even looked at them to see what they are. My assumption was that it's provided by the city or SCE for free, but I looked a couple of weeks ago when the power came on. There've definitely been some bills, so I got to figure out if it's the generator or what those are.
Well, is there anything else? And by the way, I just really appreciate you, taking the time to come on here and speak with me about this. But is there anything else that you think is salient for people to know about, or anything you want to share? It doesn't have to be related to the conversation about China or any of that, but as it relates to the fires or anything like that.
No, I mean, I think we covered it. Like I said, I know a lot of people outside of the fire areas think that things are already back to normal. My friends called me, they're like, "Are you back home?" And one of them actually came by and he was shocked. He said, "I didn't realize there's nothing left. It's like literally being on the moon." So you got, my neighborhood, you got, 30 houses that are burned and then one that's kind of standing and then 30 more that are burned. So in addition to that, there's the environmental disaster that's going to last for years and decades that we all got to live with. And in fact, some of the things, every time I went to visit my place, tried to do some cleanup, anything, within a couple of hours, I'm just coughing up my lungs, right? And so all these are major, big problems. They're not a problem for an investor who's going to plop down, a few $1 million and they can just sit on that empty lot for years and do whatever they want. But for residents, people who want to live there, these are all going to be huge problems for years to come. And these are all problems that can be addressed. Just like the drug problem, they can all be addressed, they can be dealt with. And we just need a government that is responsive and cares and takes action on our behalf and not BS us around.
Well, Reza, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna end the feed here, and yeah, I'm hoping to see you around over there here in the near future. I'd love to meet you in person.
Thank you, Luke. Definitely hit me up anytime.
Okay, brother. Take care.
All right. Have a good one.